The wind in Montana did not whisper. It howled. It rushed across the open plains with sharp, lonely cry that made the young bride feel like the land itself was warning her to turn back. But there was nowhere to turn. The stagecoach wheels groaned as they rolled over miles of rock and dust, carrying 18-year-old Laya Hart toward a husband she had never seen. For 3 days she had ridden across a world that looked too big for any person belonged to. Endless stretches of brown grass. Skies so wide it felt like it might swallow her whole in the cold, an unforgiving, biting cold that clung to her bones. At 18, Laya was a wife by paper, a girl by heart, and a stranger to everything ahead of her. Her father had pressed a marriage contract into her hands with trembling fingers. Mr. Wyatt Callahan is a good man, he had said. Rich, respected, he'll keep you safe. Safe, that was the word people liked to say around her. Safe meant food on the table, a roof through winter, and fewer mouths to feed back home. But safe also meant being sent across the country to marry a cowboy twice her age. She clutched the only photograph she had of him. Wyatt Callahan, cattle baron of Red Ridge Valley. A man with a strong jaw, unyielding posture, and eyes dark as storm clouds. He didn't smile in the photograph. He didn't soften. He looked like a man carved from the land he ruled. The coach lurched to a halt. Red Ridge, the driver called out. End of the line, miss. Laya peeked out the window. Red Ridge wasn't a town. It was a single dirt road lined with rough wooden buildings. The saloon with crooked sign, a small church worn by wind, a general store, and a blacksmith's forge spitting sparks into the fading light. Men paused to stare. Women tightened their shawls, whispering behind gloved hands. The bride had arrived. Laya stepped out onto the dusty ground. Her boots sank slightly into the earth, and the cold wind slapped her bonnet. Her breath hitched. Everything felt too big, too quiet, too sharp. And then she saw him, Wyatt Callahan. He stood apart from the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered in a black coat, dusted with mud from the trail. His hat shadowed most of his face, but she could see the jawline from the photograph. The same unflinching eyes that seemed to judge everything in front of him. His expression did not change when he saw her. He did not take a step toward her. He simply waited. Her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. This man, this stranger, was her husband. Summoning what little courage she had left, Laya walked toward him. Her small suitcase felt impossibly heavy in her gloved hand. "Mr. Callahan," she whispered. He touched the brim of his hat, his voice low and firm. "Mrs. Callahan." The title struck her like a physical blow. "Was your ride decent?" "It was long," she answered softly. Wyatt looked her over, not unkindly, but with the measured gaze of a man assessing something he'd purchased but wasn't sure how it would hold up. She flushed, ashamed of the thought. "My things," she began. "To the wagon," he said, already turning toward his horses. No welcome, no warmth, only practicality. The ride to his ranch was silent and tense. Laya kept her hands clasped tight in her lap, too afraid to speak, too unsettled to breathe easily. The horses trotted over hills until at last a massive ranch house appeared, a tall timber structure flanked by barns, corrals, and miles of rolling land marked by the Callahan cattle brand. It looked like a kingdom, and she was its newest, most uncertain inhabitant. Wyatt dismounted and helped her down. His hands were rough, calloused, startlingly warm, but the touch lasted only a moment. "You'll have your own room tonight," he said simply. "We marry at dawn." Her throat tightened. "Tomorrow already." He looked at her finally, his eyes unreadable. "That's the agreement." Inside, the house was large and cold. The walls were bare. The air smelled of leather with smoke and solitude. Wyatt pointed to the staircase. Up the steps, first door on the left. Supper's at sundown. And then he walked out. Laya climbed the stairs with trembling legs. The room was small, spare, just a bed, a washstand, and a window facing miles of merciless land. Her suitcase lay at the foot of the bed. The silence pressed against her ears. She sat on the edge of the bed. Her fingers shook. Her chest tightened. And the tears she had fought so hard contained finally spilled down her cheeks. She cried, not from weakness, but from fear, from loneliness. from the impossible way of the life she had stepped into. At 18, she was a bride. At 18, she was alone. And at 18, she had no idea that the man who would soon be her husband was watching her from the doorway, hidden in the shadows, his jaw tight, his eyes troubled. He had seen her tears, and something inside him shifted. But neither of them knew yet how their wedding night would change everything. The wedding at dawn was quiet and cold, a ceremony stripped of warmth and celebration. The sky was still pale gray when Reverend Collins arrived, breath fogging in the morning chill. Wyatt Callahan stood beside Laya, tall and unreadable, his coat dusted with frost. She stood small beside him, wrapped in a simple cream dress that felt far too thin for the sharp mountain air. She tried to keep her hands steady as she held them before her, but her fingers trembled. "Will you take this man?" the Reverend asked. Her voice shook when she whispered, "I will." Wyatt's reply was firm, solid as a lamb beneath their feet. "I will." There was no kiss, no gentle smile, just a nod from Wyatt and a murmured, "We're done here," before he helped her step back into the house. The witnesses, Wyatt's foreman Hank and his wife Ruth, offered polite congratulations. Ruth gave Laya a quick squeeze of the hand, her eyes soft with sympathy. Then they left on horseback, leaving Laya alone with a man she barely knew and now legally belonged to. The silence in the house settled like dust. Wyatt sat at the long dining table and gestured for her to join him. A pot of coffee sat steaming, and a plate of biscuits waited. "Eat," he said quietly. She tried. She really did. But her throat tightened with every swallow. Wyatt watched her with those storm-dark eyes. Steady, unreadable, impossible to decipher. "You'll need strength," he said. "For the night." She knew he meant. Her stomach twisted. The hours passed in a blur of chores and quiet footsteps. Wyatt spent the morning in the corral, working a young stallion, muscles tensing and releasing as he wrestled the reins. He didn't glance her way, not even once, yet she felt him everywhere, in the creak of the floors, the heavy footsteps, the steady thud it would chop for the fire. As sundown approached, her heartbeat quickened. The house grew colder. The shadows lengthened. After supper, Wyatt stood and lit a lantern. "It's time." Her breath caught. He began walking toward the stairs. Laya followed, fear filling her lungs like a rising tide. Each step felt heavier than the last. He pushed open the door to his bedroom. Not hers. A large bed dominated the room. The quilt pulled tight, the pillows neat. A single lantern burned beside it, casting warm, flickering light that deepened every shadow. Wyatt set the lantern on the nightstand. His voice was quiet but firm. "I'll let you change." Her feet rooted to the floor. He hesitated, looking at her for the first time with something other than stoic restraint. "Laya," he said softly, "you're my wife now. You don't need to fear me." But she did, not because he was cruel, but because the moment felt too big, too fast, too overwhelming. He stepped out and closed the door. She heard his boots move down the hall. Her hands shook so violently she could barely unbutton her dress. She put on the simple white nightgown Ruth had set out earlier. The cotton felt thin against her chilled skin. Her reflection in the small mirror startled her. Wide eyes, flushed cheeks, fear visible in every line of her face. She sat on the edge of the bed, fingers pressed against the mattress, waiting for footsteps she wasn't ready for. The door creaked open. Wyatt entered quietly. He had removed his gun belt and coat, leaving him in a plain undershirt that clung to the strength in his arms and shoulders. He looked larger in the lamplight, larger and somehow more human, a man shaped by hard land and harder years. He closed the door behind him with a soft click. The sound struck her like a hammer. Laya lowered her gaze, breath trembling. Wyatt stepped closer, his boots slow and steady against the wooden floor. But when he reached the bed, he stopped. He stared at her, truly stared, and something flickered across his face. Confusion, concern, pain, even. "Laya," he said quietly, "look at me." She forced her eyes up, and he saw them, her tears, silent, uncontrollable, shimmering in the lantern light. The sound she let out was tiny, broken, the kind made when a person can't hold himself together anymore. Laya tried to wipe her face, tried to hide it, but the tears only came faster. Her shoulders shook. The fear she had carried for days burst through all at once. At 18, she cried on her wedding night. Wyatt froze. He had expected nerves. Shyness. But not this. This trembling, heartbreaking fear. He stood still for a long moment. Every muscle in his body tightened as if the air had turned to stone. Then he stepped back, not forward. Back. He dragged a hand over his face, exhaling hard as if fighting something inside himself. Then he crossed the room, pulled a folded blanket from the wardrobe, and laid it on the floor beside the bed. He placed a pillow at one end. He did not touch her. He did not approach again. He simply said, voice rough and low, "You sleep? I'll stay here. No harm will come to you." She stared at him, bewildered, still crying softly. He didn't climb into bed. He didn't claim any right. He lay down on the floor, facing the wall, shoulders stiff with restraint. The lantern dimmed as the oil ran low. Laya curled beneath the quilt, her breath shaky but slowly easing. The house grew silent. Wyatt's voice broke the dark, soft and strained. "When you're ready, Laya, not before." Her tears paused. It was the first kindness he had offered her. And beneath the fear, beneath the loneliness, something shifted in her chest. A tiny, fragile seed of trust. The night passed without a touch, without a claim, without a demand, but not without meaning. Because the man she feared, the man she thought would take what the law allowed him, had instead shown restraint she never expected. And she would never forget it. Not tonight. Not ever. Laya woke before the sun. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The quilt was heavy over her, the room dim with the last flicker of lantern light, and the air carried the faint scent of smoke and leather. Her heart beat hard as memory rushed back. Wyatt Callahan. The wedding. The room. Her tears. Slowly, she turned her head. He was still there. Wyatt lay on the floor beside the bed, one arm folded beneath his head, the other resting across his chest. The blanket barely covered him, but he looked peaceful, calm in a way she hadn't seen the day before. The early gray light softened the harsh lines of his face, making him look younger, almost gentle. He had not moved in the night. Not once. She watched him breathe, slow, steady, untroubled. She remembered his voice in the dark. "When you're ready, not before." It echoed inside her with a warmth she didn't understand. Quietly, she slipped from the bed. Her feet touched the cold floorboards and she shivered. She reached for her shawl, wrapping it around her shoulders, trying not to make a sound. But Wyatt stirred. His eyes opened immediately. Sharp, alert, the reflex of a man who had spent too many years sleeping lightly. When he saw her, he relaxed a little. "Morning," he said, voice rough from sleep. She froze, unsure how to answer. He sat up slowly, folding the blanket with the same neat precision she had seen him use with everything else. He didn't stand. He didn't approach. He simply rested his arms on his knees and looked at her, really looked at her. "Did you rest?" he asked quietly. Laya nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. She had slept in broken pieces, waking again and again to make sure he was still on the floor and not beside her. But she didn't know how to explain that without sounding childish. Wyatt studied her face, and his eyes softened in a way she hadn't expected. "I told you no harm would come to you," he murmured, "and I meant it." Her throat tightened. He stood, not abruptly, but slowly, giving her space. His full height filled the room, but he didn't seem threatening, just large, solid, a man shaped by a hard world, trying to be gentle in a small room. "Laya," he said, adjusting his sleeves, "you're my wife now, but that doesn't make you my possession. I won't take what you aren't ready to give." Her breath trembled. He stepped around her, careful not to brush against her, and opened the door. "I'll be outside. Take all the time you need." He stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. Laya let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her chest ached with relief, confusion, and something deeper, something warm that frightened her in a different way. He had protected her during the night, but this This was the moment everything quietly changed. Wyatt waited downstairs, standing by the hearth with a cup of hot coffee. He stared into the flames, jaw tight, shoulders tense. He hadn't slept much. Seeing her cry had cut deeper than anything else in his life. It had changed something he couldn't name. He heard her soft steps on the stairs. When she reached the bottom, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched her. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her shawl wrapped around her, her eyes unsure, but no longer full of dread. She approached slowly, like a skittish colt learning where safety lived. Wyatt held out a cup of coffee. Her hands brushed his as she took it, light as a whisper, warm as sunrise. The contact sent a jolt through them both. Laya swallowed hard and lowered her gaze. "Thank you," she murmured. He cleared his throat. "I'll get the horses ready in a bit." But first, he hesitated. The mighty Wyatt Callahan actually hesitated. "We should talk." Laya's heart hammered again, but this time not from fear. Wyatt took a breath, steady and deep. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I know enough to say this. You're not here to serve me. You're here to stand beside me. As my wife. As my equal." Her eyes lifted slowly, searching his face. He continued, his voice rough but sincere. "I know I'm not a gentleman. I don't smile much. Don't talk much. Didn't figure I'd ever have someone in this house besides the ranch hands. But you," he paused, struggling for the right words, "you deserve better than fear." Laya's breath shook. Her throat tightened. This was not the man she had imagined on the long trip west. This was not the cold stranger in the photograph. This was someone else entirely. She stepped closer, not boldly, not confidently, but bravely. "I was scared," she whispered. "But not of you. Not really. I was scared of everything. The land, the silence, the future." He nodded slowly. "Makes sense." "And last night," her voice trembled, "you could have taken what was expected, but you didn't." Wyatt's jaw flexed. "I ain't that kind of man." Something warm and fragile blossomed in her chest. She looked at the floor, fingers twisting in her shawl. "Wyatt, I don't know much about being a wife, or a woman of the West, but I want to learn." She lifted her eyes again, courage flickering in them like a new flame. "And I want to understand you." The room fell into a soft, breathless silence. Wyatt set his coffee aside, stepped toward her and gently, very gently, lifted her chin with 2 fingers, giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't. His voice dropped to a quiet rumble. "We'll take each day as it comes. Together." Her breath caught, and then, slowly, cautiously, Wyatt bent and pressed the faintest, softest kiss to her forehead. Not her lips. Not yet. A promise. Not a claim. Laya's eyes fluttered shut. Warmth spread through her limbs, through her chest, through every fearful place inside her. For the first time since leaving home, she felt safe. Not because her father said she would be. Not because a contract said she must be. But because Wyatt had shown her he would earn her trust, not demand it. They stood like that. Close, but not touching. The soft morning light, filling the room around them. A new marriage. A new land. A new beginning. And though neither dared say it aloud yet, they both knew this was the sunrise everything would grow from. Their real story had just begun.